It started innocently enough. I had joined the gym after a fight with my husband, thinking it was time to regain control over something. My body, at least, if not my heart. I wasn't expecting much, just a few hours a week, to burn off the stress and the lingering sadness that followed me everywhere. But then I met Leo. Leo wasn't like any other trainer I had worked with before. It wasn't just his looks, though. Admittedly, those helped. He had this energy about him, a quiet confidence that seemed effortless. His voice was steady, calm, and when he spoke to you, it was like he was sharing a secret. His deep green eyes had a way of catching mine in the mirror while we trained, and every time they did, I felt something inside me stir. I just missed it at first, thinking it was just me being single again, looking for something to fill the void. But then, little by little, things began to change. It started with small gestures. The way he would adjust my posture during our sessions, his fingers brushing against my skin, sending little sparks through me. The way he'd say my name softly, with a hint of something more behind it. And then there were the glances. I'd catch him looking at me. Sometimes, not in the obvious way that made me feel objectified, but in a way that felt intimate, like he was seeing something more than just a client. And maybe that's where the trouble started. When I began to wonder if he was feeling the same pull that I was, I didn't want to think too much about it. I told myself I was imagining things, projecting my loneliness onto someone who was just doing his job. But as the weeks went on, it became harder to ignore. One afternoon, after a particularly tough session, Leo suggested we stay behind for some extra stretching. I hesitated at first. The gym was emptying out, and I could feel the familiar heat rising in my chest, that same tension that had been building between us over the last few weeks. I should have said no, but I didn't. "Yeah, sure. That sounds good," I heard myself say. I lay down on the mat, the cool surface beneath me, a sharp contrast to the warmth spreading through my body. Leo knelt beside me close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. He started with my legs, guiding them into stretches, his hands firm but gentle. At first it was all professional, focused on the task, but then his hands began to linger. "Relax," he said, his voice low and smooth. He placed his hand on my lower back, pushing gently to deepen the stretch. I tried to do as he said, but how could I relax when my entire body was on high alert? Every nerve was buzzing. I could feel the tension between us, like a physical thing thick and heavy in the air. His hand stayed on my back for just a second, longer than it needed to, his fingers pressing into my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. I glanced up at him, and for a moment our eyes met. There was something in his gaze, something that made me feel like we weren't just stretching anymore. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like we had crossed some invisible line, one that I wasn't sure I wanted to go back over. He moved his hands to my shoulders, gently massaging the muscles there. "You've been carrying a lot of tension," he murmured, his voice so close that I could feel his breath on my neck. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on my breathing, on anything other than the way his hands felt on me. But it was impossible. The slow, deliberate way he moved, the heat of his skin against mine, it was all too much. Every touch sent a pulse of desire through me, and I knew I was in dangerous territory. I should have stopped him. I should have sat up and said something, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, frozen in that moment, torn between what I knew was right and what I wanted. The minutes ticked by, and with every passing second, the tension between us grew. His hands moved down my arms, his touch soft but sure, his fingers grazing my skin like they had all the time in the world. My breath hitched when he reached my hips, guiding me into another stretch. But it didn't feel like a stretch anymore. It felt like something else entirely. Something that had been building between us for weeks. Maya. He whispered my name, and I felt a shiver race down my spine. His voice was low, intimate, like he was saying something he shouldn't. "You're doing great." I couldn't even respond. My mind was spinning, my body betraying me as I leaned into his touch, craving more of it. I knew it was wrong, I knew I should stop. But I couldn't. Not with him so close. Not with the way he was looking at me, like I was the only person in the world. His hands then held my waist softly, then went lower and grabbed something he wasn't meant to. This sent a wave around my body. And then, as if sensing my hesitation, he pulled away slightly. His hands hovered over me, not quite touching, but close enough that I could still feel the heat of his skin. "I think that's enough for today," he said, his voice quiet, controlled. But there was something underneath it, something strange. I sat up slowly, my heart racing. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The gym was silent around us, the fading light casting long shadows on the floor. I could feel the weight of what had almost happened, hanging in the air, thick and heavy. I looked at him, trying to read his expression, but his face was carefully neutral. I should go," I stammered, standing up quickly. My legs felt unsteady beneath me, like I had just been caught doing something I shouldn't. He didn't stop me. He just nodded, his eyes lingering on mine for a second longer. Before he turned away, I grabbed my bag and practically bolted from the gym, my mind racing. What the hell that just happened? How would I let it get this far? I knew I was attracted to him. It felt the pull from the very beginning. But I hadn't expected it to come to this. As I walked home, the cool, evening air did little to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way his hands had felt on my skin, the way his voice had dropped when he said my name. It was like I had been teetering on the edge of something that I knew could change everything. But what was it really? Was it just sexual tension? A moment of weakness? Or was it something more? I couldn't figure it out, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. But the truth was, I didn't regret it. Not really. There was a part of me, maybe a bigger part than I wanted to admit, that wanted to know what would have happened if I hadn't pulled away, if I had leaned into him instead of retreating, if I had let that tension between us snap instead of holding it back. I couldn't deny the attraction, the way his presence made my heart race, the way his touch had sent shivers down my spine. And I knew deep down that this wasn't over. I kept waiting for him to say something, to acknowledge what had happened, or almost happened between us. But he never did. Our sessions continued, professional and focused, as if nothing had changed. But every time our hands brushed, every time our eyes met, I could feel it. The tension, the possibility, the unspoken desire that lingered just beneath the surface. It was a game we were both playing, one that neither of us was willing to end. And as much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't sure I wanted it to end either. Because the truth was, I liked it. I liked the way he made me feel alive, desired, wanted. And maybe that was what scared me the most. The next day I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest, my mind replaying the events of the day before. I tried to shake it off, but it clung to me, like the soreness in my muscles. From yesterday's session, I told myself I needed space, a break from the gym, from him, to clear my head. But avoiding Leo wasn't going to fix what was happening inside me. I didn't know if I was running from him or from myself. By the afternoon, my resolve crumbled. I found myself lacing up my sneakers and heading to the gym, as if some invisible force was pulling me back. I promised myself I would keep things professional. No lingering touches, no suggestive glances, nothing. I just needed a good workout. That's all. The gym was quiet when I walked in, the usual evening rush not quite hitting yet. I scanned the room, half expecting Leo to already be there waiting for me. But he wasn't. Relief flooded through me, and disappointment followed close behind. I sat up on the treadmill, hoping the rhythmic pounding of my feet would drown out the noise in my head. 20 minutes in, I felt his presence before I even saw him. It was as if the air shifted when he walked in. He had that effect. I glanced in the mirror, catching his reflection as he moved through the gym, his focus on a client across the room. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I could get through this, I had to. Another 20 minutes passed and I was deep in my workout, my legs burning and my heart pounding. I hadn't even noticed when he made his way over. But suddenly there he was, standing next to my treadmill, casually leaning against the frame. "You're back," he said. His voice calm, but with an undercurrent that I couldn't quite place. I slowed my pace, my chest tightening. Yeah, I needed to sweat it out. Leo smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good, I was starting to think I scared you off yesterday." My heart skipped a beat. There it was, the elephant in the room out in the open. I forced a laugh, trying to keep it light. "No, not at all. I just needed a breather." His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt that pull again. The one that made me want to close the distance between us, to see what would happen if we didn't stop this time. But I couldn't, I wouldn't. "I get it," he said, his voice soft. "Sometimes a little space is good." I nodded, grateful that he was giving me an out, even though I wasn't sure if I wanted to take it. "Do you want to continue where we left off yesterday?" he asked, his tone professional again. But I could still feel the weight of the question. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes, to dive back into that tension, to see where it would lead. But another part of me, the rational part, knew it was a bad idea. Still, I found myself nodding before I could think better of it. "Yeah, let's do it." He gestured for me to follow him to the mats again, and as I stepped off the treadmill, my legs wobbled, not just from the workout, but from the anticipation building in my chest. We didn't talk as I lay down on the mat, the same one where it had all happened yesterday. I could feel the tension crackling in the air around us, unspoken but undeniable. Leo knelt beside me, his hands hovering over my legs for a second, before he began guiding me into stretches. The first few were routine, his touch firm and professional. But as we moved deeper into the session, that familiar electricity returned, buzzing between us like a live wire. His hands lingered longer than they should have, his fingers brushing my skin in ways that made my breath hitch. And then, just like yesterday, his voice dropped low and intimate. "You're holding tension here," he said softly, his hands pressing gently into the small of my back. He went on to massage my thighs, and before I knew it, my legs were spread wide. I just lay there, unsure of what will happen next. I swallowed hard, trying to focus on the stretch, but it was impossible with him so close. The heat of his body, the way his fingers moved over my skin, it was too much. I felt myself teetering on the edge again, torn between the right thing and the thing I wanted. "Maya," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I closed my eyes, trying to wield the tension away, but it was no use. It was there, thick and heavy, pulling me toward him. "I can stop if you want," he said quietly, his hands pausing. I opened my eyes, my breath shallow, the look in his eyes. It wasn't just desire. It was something more, something that scared me. He wasn't asking about the stretch. He was asking if we were going to cross that line, the one we had danced around for weeks. I wanted to say something, anything to break the spell, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just lay there staring up at him, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, as if sensing my turmoil, he slowly moved his hands away, creating space between us. "Okay," he said, his voice gentle, understanding. I sat up, the air between us charged with everything unsaid. For a moment, we just looked at each other, both of us caught in the middle of something we couldn't quite name. "I'm sorry," he said, finally breaking the silence. "I didn't mean to—" "No," I cut him off, shaking my head. "It's not just you." We both knew what I meant. It wasn't just him that I crossed the line. I had to, and now standing on the edge, I didn't know how to step back. I think I started struggling to find the right words. "I think maybe we need some space." "I don't want things to get complicated," Leo nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I understand." And I knew he did. He understood all too well, because he was feeling the same thing. The connection between us. The pole, it wasn't going to go away on its own. We had to make a choice. "I'll switch you to another trainer," he said quietly, his voice strained. "I think that's best." "Okay," I whispered, my chest tight. "That's probably for the best." He nodded, his eyes softening. "Take care of yourself, Maya." "You too," I said, my voice barely audible. I grabbed my bag and walked out of the gym, my heart heavy, my mind swirling with everything that had just happened. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I realized that something had shifted. It wasn't just about Leo anymore. It was about me. What I wanted, what I needed. I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep running from the tension, from the pole between us. I had to face it, whatever that meant. And as I walked home, my thoughts swirling, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever see Leo again, and if next time things would be different.